This is something that's interesting, as Kevin was mentioning, when we started looking at social media policies, this was the best practice that I saw in all of the good social media policies. That, especially some of the tech companies like, I think it was Sun and IBM, who strongly encourage their employees to have blogs about technology. One of their points in those policies was make sure that you're identifying yourself. That's just kind of it's less of a legal point and really more of kind of an internet ethics point, so people understand where you're coming from, that they know where the message is coming from. Because in the unlikely instance that somebody were to connect the dots back to you and it looked like you were kind of subversively promoting something, or trying to harm somebody in some way by one of your comments, that could have an impact back on the person who's posting it and potentially their employer as well. So that's really what that point is about. And also this kind of goes back to blogs, but to a certain extent for people on their Facebook pages and other social media platforms, use a disclaimer that your views do not represent those for us for PBS. In particular, you think about those examples of the blogs that I just mentioned. If somebody has a media blog and they work at PBS, they should have this disclaimer on their blog somewhere so that they're prominent. And it doesn't have to be on a huge font front page, but somewhere that people get it, right? That says that you're just talking from your personal perspective. And this is another one. We spent a lot of time looking at the language of how to say this. And when you look at our policy, you'll see kind of where we came out. But we're encouraging people to refrain from comments that could be interpreted as slurs or insults or demeaning language. And when we talked in our sessions with people about this, we essentially said, don't use language that you wouldn't use around the office. Although I did get a comment from a few people like, well, you should hear some of the things people say around the office. I'm like, well, so maybe that's not a great standard. But generally, don't say things that you would be embarrassed if they were on a billboard. Don't say things that you would be embarrassed about if it was on the front page of the Washington Post. So these were and I think we may have a couple of other things in our language about this, but essentially, just be respectful of others. Reconnect, chat, comment. This is another thing, and I think, so I work, the reason I even got involved with this is because I provide the legal support to PBS's interactive team. I'm also our intellectual property counsel. And so I've taken the position since I've been at PBS that we should be the standard bearer for protecting intellectual property of others. So this, to me, is a really big point, but it's something that sometimes people lose sight of a little bit. That you do need to be careful and respect trademark, copyright, fair use laws. We won't go into some of the issues and maybe in the previous session we talked a little bit about the Digital Millennium Copyright Act and if people are posting material to your website and it's copyrighted, how to deal with that. But this was more to encourage PBS employees to be careful of those things. But don't just wholesale cut and paste articles onto your blog or onto your Facebook page if you could do that. But just be careful of and respect the intellectual property rights of others. And the last thing on the key policy points is protecting confidential information. Most of our employees don't have access to a lot of confidential information, so this wasn't a huge issue for us. But there are instances where, in particular, where we're trying to hold back the announcement of a new program or some new initiative, and it's really important. People get excited if they've been working on something, that they want to get it out there, they want to get it out there fast, but it needs to be coordinated. You don't want somebody jumping the gun to tweet some big initiative before the communications team has been able to do that and do that in a way that they feel is best. So that was another big point. Okay. So in looking at the different risks that social media policies should protect against, I'll start with legal risks. And I think, like I said, this is why Jamie on my first day came to my office and said, hey, here's our social media policy. I think it's almost done. Let's see how quickly we can get this taken care of. But the legal risks are a little bit hard to define right now. I'm going to go through a couple of examples. They're a little bit more, I tried to pick the liveliest examples that I could find just because, but the principles, because the principles are a little bit more bland. But the law is still a little bit undeveloped, and probably most of you are aware that companies where employers can be liable for actions of their employees in certain situations. And whether or not that liability would apply in the use of social media is something that hasn't been fully resolved. In fact, there are very few cases that have gone all the way to trial, but there are a couple of pending cases right now that could start to kind of set some parameters around that. And the first one is a Twitter case that I call defaming the cookie. And it's a situation where Kim Kardashian, I think probably she's a reality TV star, right? Kim Kardashian is a paid spokesperson for QuickTrim, which is a diet product. Somehow this other, an owner of another diet product company called the Cookie Diet, connected her in an article or an interview to his diet. And so Kim Kardashian tweeted out this first thing. She said, Dr. Siegel's cookie diet is falsely promoting that I'm on his diet. Not true. I would never do this unhealthy diet. I do QuickTrim. Right, well, it turns out she was being paid $10,000 to $15,000 per tweet about QuickTrim, which she didn't disclose. Great work if you can get it, right? It would be great if someone were paying me that much for tweets. She didn't disclose that fact. And then the second tweet that she followed up with is that if Dr. Siegel is lying about me being on this diet, what else are they lying about? Not cool. So in 140 characters, she potentially put her employer, not really employer for her, but somebody who's paying her to work for them at risk. And so in December of over a year ago, the Cookie Diet people sued Kim Kardashian and QuickTrim. And that case is still pending. Most of these cases, because the vagueness of the law, they don't end up going through a trial. They don't go to court. They end up wanting to settle. This one, last I checked, it's still out there. So my guess is that they'll end up trying to negotiate something. But it would be it's a very interesting issue, and it goes back to the whole point of, from the legal perspective, why we should have a social media policy in place at all. Because if it does turn out that companies can be liable for the things that their employees tweet, then we all really need to be careful to ensure that our employees know some parameters around what they can or what they should and shouldn't be tweeting about. So anyway, it will be an interesting case if it ever does work its way through the courts. Another one is one that's more recent. It's actually scheduled to go to trial in Los Angeles in about a week. So this one actually may, we may get some sort of legal precedent here, but it's a dispute between Courtney Love, who is a punk rock singer, the widow of Kurt Cobain from Nirvana, and a designer, I don't know how to pronounce this, but a fashion designer. It's a long series of tweets that Courtney Love tweeted about this person. I got the summary from the Hollywood Reporter. Basically, Courtney Love was ripping this person apart for some dispute that they had. And again, the major issue here is can even, this kind of goes to a deeper question, I guess. So the first question is, can employers be liable for what their employees are tweeting? This question is the person who tweeted are they going to be held to the same libel standards as we have in regular print press? Or is it going to be something different because of the kind of the short nature of Twitter? It's only 140 characters. It's almost like conversation. So what would be the legal standard to look at to even see if the person publishing the tweet would be held liable for libel? So anyway, and like I said, that's a case that's actually scheduled to go to trial. So that would be very interesting to see how that plays out. And then kind of a related issue, and I was telling Kevin the story. Last month I was at a conference of the Online Publishers Association. It's basically a trade group that does some lobbying for with the FCC. And there were a lot of people there from newspaper sites. Someone was there from ESPN and other sites that publish a lot of content. And one of the conversations we had was about social media policies and how people are approaching this. And this issue came up that we had not thought of and we have not had to deal with. But a couple of people mentioned it, and so now we are going to start thinking about how to deal with this. And it's related to LinkedIn. And someone told the story of that they had an employee that was poorly performing, and so they were putting together the typical performance plan with the person. The person continued not to perform well, and they moved towards termination. Well, during that process, as they were moving towards termination, this person got either not his direct supervisor, kind of a dotted line supervisor, and some other employees that were on the same level to write very positive feedback on his LinkedIn page about him. So when the person was finally terminated, he turned around and sued the company for wrongful termination, and is pointing to these endorsements on LinkedIn as an example of how great he was as an employee. And so this company, and there was another one that said that they had already kind of come that close, but they had already done the same thing. But these two companies have, as part of their policy, have said that nobody can endorse others on LinkedIn, and they have that as a blanket policy. And it'll be interesting to see how this works out with us, because generally we did not feel comfortable making blanket statements that nobody can do this or can do that. Our policy is more around setting parameters for people and educating them, and hoping that they'll making sure that they'll do the right thing, and if they don't, we'll hold them accountable individually for that. But it is something to think about, and perhaps it's something that it's something we're definitely going to think about. But I wanted to put that out there as another example of something that I don't think people had really, maybe people have thought about a lot. But it's another situation where, because of the nature of social media, because it lives forever, because it can be kind of casual, but still permanent, because of those things combined together, how it can create some issues. So that's just something to keep in mind. Another thing is, we were going through our policy and kind of putting it together, is we thought about the public relations risks. And we don't have time to go through this today, but you can quickly, and probably some of you know these examples, it's really easy to Google, people who've been fired because of Twitter. And there are a lot of high-profile examples of people who have quickly tweeted something, and it's turned out to cause a problem for their company, and it ended up getting them fired. One example I think of offhand is a reporter for CNN who tweeted something, her respect for a Palestinian leader who had just passed away, I think the day before. Maybe some of you remember this situation. But CNN, then there was a lot of negative publicity for CNN. They felt that it hampered her journalistic integrity, and she ended up being fired for that. So there are, and part of the things that we've tried to also talk about with employees is how the things that they're doing in social media can have public relations impact back on the company. And especially for those of you who have a lot of news organizations, if you're creating news content, I would also suggest, our policy doesn't get into that since we don't produce things. I would suggest maybe taking a look at the NPR policy. I spoke with Denise Leary the other day, who's one of my counterparts. She's an attorney over at NPR. They have a lot of language in their social media policy about the distinction between people who are reporters versus just regular employees, and the things that people can and can't do. So that may be another good resource to take a look at as you're looking at those things, and looking at thinking about some of the public relations risks that might be out there. I already mentioned confidential information, but I did want to put that on the slide just to kind of summarize this up. It's challenging to balance these things. There's clearly a really good benefit for engaging with the audience on social media. Kevin mentioned all of, for PBS we have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of followers on Twitter and Facebook. It drives traffic back to pbs.org. It creates interest in programming. It is a very strong and relevant tool today for people. It doesn't surprise me at all that people 18 to, what was the age, 16 to 35, 2/3 of them are going on Facebook every day. That doesn't surprise me at all. I've got teenage kids. I go on Facebook every day, and I see all the different people who are on there every day. It doesn't surprise me at all. And I don't think that it's something that's going away anytime soon. There was a great piece on Charlie Rose last Friday where he had the author of, I think it was the book that the movie The Social Experiment was based on, who knew a lot about Facebook. He had a reporter who had done a lot of reporting on social media. He also had somebody who had written a lot about Google, I think a book about the Google founders. And it was a great and fascinating discussion about the growth of Facebook, the explosion of social media, and how it's not, it will change and evolve and continue to do that, but just the way that it's getting people to interact in a different manner, it's not going on anytime soon. And so these issues will continue to, I think, to grow. From the risks that are out there, we'll probably continue to see bumps in the road. And I think, and so that's part of why we decided, well, we just need to make sure we get some rules of the road out there for people to have to help them.